May 5, 1873. Dr. William York had been missing for nearly 3 weeks when his brother, Colonel Alexander York, rode into southeastern Kansas with a group of investigators. What they uncovered beneath the floorboards of a lonely inn near Cherryvale turned into one of the most terrifying murder cases in American history. 11 bodies were discovered, carefully hidden in shallow graves, behind a plain two-story building where travelers had once stopped for rest. The killers had vanished without a trace, leaving only blood-stained tools, a trapdoor marked with human remains, and the dark memory of a young woman named Kate Bender, who called herself a spiritualist and claimed she could speak with the dead. For more than 20 years, the Bender family had run their deadly business along one of Kansas Territory's busiest roads, and Kate had been the most important part of their scheme. Before we continue into the story of Kate Bender and the nightmare that unfolded in Labette County, I want to pause for a moment. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so, and leave a comment letting us know which state you are listening from. Your support helps us keep these forgotten pieces of American history alive. The question that haunted the investigators then, and still puzzles historians today, is how 4 people managed to murder at least 11 victims over more than 2 decades without drawing real suspicion from those around them. The answer lies in the careful mask of respectability created by Kate Bender herself, a woman whose charm, intelligence, and cold determination made her a perfect predator on America's wild frontier. Kansas in the 1870s was a hard and unforgiving place. Survival often depended on strangers, and southeastern Kansas had become a crossroads for the endless flow of settlers, cattlemen, and fortune seekers heading toward Colorado and California. The Osage Mission Trail cut through this landscape, serving as a major path westward. The trail itself was rough and rutted, stretching across miles of empty prairie grass, broken only by the occasional line of cottonwoods along creek beds, and the faraway outlines of homesteads that stood like lonely islands in a sea of grass. Small towns appeared every 20 or 30 miles, offering basic services to tired travelers: fresh horses, warm meals, and a bed for the night. Most of these settlements were little more than a general store, a blacksmith's shop, perhaps a saloon, and a cluster of small homes built around a dusty main street. The nearest doctor could be 50 miles away. The closest sheriff might be farther still. Mail carriers or peddlers were often the only links between these places, and they might not appear for weeks at a time. Labette County, where the Benders settled, was just like this. The land was scattered with farms, each family living miles away from the next. This isolation gave frontier families both freedom and risk. They lived without the pressure of larger towns, but when danger came, help was never close by. During cold winters, neighbors might not see each other for months. A lone traveler vanishing on a dirt road might not be missed until long after it was too late to mount a real search. Lawmen could take days to arrive on horseback, and when they did, their ability to investigate crimes across such great distances was thin at best. Sheriffs were often responsible for areas bigger than some eastern states. With only a handful of deputies to help, news of missing people might not spread from one settlement to another for weeks, sometimes months. In this world, running an inn gave a family great trust and responsibility. Innkeepers often became centers of news, sharing information about road conditions, weather, and whether certain trails were safe. They sometimes acted as bankers, holding valuables for travelers too nervous to carry their money across dangerous territory. Above all, they provided food, shelter, and the kindness that made long journeys possible across the vast prairie. It was into this setting that the Bender family arrived in the late 1860s. No one knew much about where they had come from. Their past was unclear, even to their closest neighbors. John Bender, a man in his 60s with a heavy German accent and little English, bought a 160-acre homestead about 8 miles northeast of the growing town of Cherryvale. The land was perfectly placed along the Osage Mission Trail, sitting on a rise where the road dipped into a small valley. From either direction, travelers could see the Bender house long before they reached it. Its pale walls and red roof stood out against the endless sea of tall grass. With John came his wife, Elvira, a severe woman in her 50s who rarely spoke to strangers. She looked on visitors with sharp suspicion and answered questions with only short grunts or nods. Many assumed she could not speak English at all. Her manner was so cold that most travelers avoided her whenever possible, dealing instead with the other family members. The Bender household also included 2 grown children. John Jr., a man in his 20s, appeared slow in mind though strong in body. He often stood staring blankly when strangers spoke, while his sister carried the conversations. Neighbors sometimes hired him for hard labor, since he could manage tasks that needed muscle but little thought. Then there was Kate. Kate was around 24 and would become the heart of their deadly plan. Unlike her parents, she spoke fluent English, only slightly marked with a German accent. She seemed far more educated than her family's station suggested. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, with striking dark hair arranged in fancy styles unusual for the frontier, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through people. She was graceful, quick with words, and bold enough to charm even the most cautious traveler. But what truly set Kate apart were her claims of spiritual powers. She said she could speak with the dead and offered herbal cures for sickness. During this period, spiritualism was growing popular in America, especially among families still mourning losses from the Civil War. Kate's services drew people from far away, some traveling great distances to visit her. Word spread quickly, and many travelers stopped at the Bender Inn just to see her, hoping for messages from lost loved ones or advice about choices they faced. The Bender home itself was plain yet sturdy, built of limestone cut nearby, with thick walls strong enough to protect against prairie storms and the winter cold. To travelers, the house looked solid and welcoming. The bottom floor served several purposes. The front room was a small store, offering supplies, bullets, and food. The back room was both dining space and lodging for those staying the night. A wagon canvas hung from the ceiling, acting as a curtain to divide the store from the family's private area. What made the inn most appealing were its low prices and Kate's reputation. She not only offered food and rest, but also provided conversation, charm, and entertainment to weary guests. Many found themselves drawn to her, and it was this magnetism that gave the Bender family their opportunity. She would entertain guests with stories of her spiritual visions, offer to tell their fortunes through cards or palm readings, or perform elaborate séances for those wishing to speak with lost loved ones. Many visitors left convinced of her unusual abilities and spread word about the extraordinary young woman who seemed able to connect the world of the living with the world of the dead. The family's business plan appeared reliable, and their reputation in the area was mostly favorable. Neighbors thought of them as hardworking German settlers, earning a decent living by helping travelers and adding to the progress of their fast-growing community. Kate, more than the others, built friendships with several well-known local men, and there were frequent whispers about possible marriage matches. She went to social events when asked, joined community talks about opening schools and churches, and even helped in raising money for projects that supported public improvements. The disappearance of Dr. William York in March 1873 would become the turning point that destroyed the Bender family's carefully built image. But it was not the first strange vanishing along that stretch of the Osage Mission Trail. For years, travelers sometimes went missing between towns, with their absence usually blamed on the many dangers of frontier life. There were still occasional Indian raids despite signed treaties, and wild animals like wolves and bears still roamed the plains. Bandits often targeted lone travelers, and it was also possible to simply get lost in the endless prairies, where one wrong turn could mean days of wandering without food, shelter, or water. Such disappearances had actually become more common in the 5 years leading up to Dr. York's case. But these incidents often went unnoticed, since communication between the scattered settlements was poor and irregular. If a merchant never arrived, people might assume he had chosen another route or been delayed by storms, If a family on their way to start a new farm never showed up, others might believe they had simply settled in another spot. In the unsettled world of westward growth, people came and went so often that keeping track of individuals required more organization than most small frontier towns could provide. Dr. York was different from the usual frontier wanderer in several important ways. He was a respected doctor working in Fort Scott, and his regular appointments made his movements predictable, so his absence was noticed almost at once. He was also the brother of Colonel Alexander York, a powerful Kansas politician with the means and connections to push for a serious investigation if something happened to his family. Most importantly, Dr. York carried himself with the confidence of an educated man who was used to being treated with respect, which made it unlikely he would be frightened into changing plans or go off the trail without strong reason. On March 9, 1873, while traveling from Fort Scott to Independence, Dr. York stopped at the Bender Inn. Reports from that time describe him as a well-dressed man in his 40s, riding a strong horse and carrying leather saddlebags filled with valuable medical tools and supplies. As was his habit, he also carried a fair amount of cash to buy more supplies that might not be found in small villages. Witnesses remembered seeing him at the inn that evening, talking in an animated way with Kate Bender about where he was headed and why he was making the journey. The doctor arrived just as the sun was going down, throwing long shadows over the prairie and making further travel risky on the poorly marked trail. Kate welcomed him warmly, showing great interest in his work and asking about the families he treated. She claimed to know something about herbs and natural healing, suggesting they might have much to talk about over dinner. Dr. York, who enjoyed good conversation during his travels, seemed pleased to meet someone who could discuss medicine. During their meal, Kate entertained him with tales of her visions and offered to do a reading that might give insight into his future practice. Later witnesses remembered her asking many questions about his travel routes, whether he kept to strict schedules, and how quickly people would notice if he failed to arrive at certain appointments. At the time, these questions seemed normal, the kind of polite interest a hostess might show. But Dr. York never made it to Independence. The following day, when he failed to attend his scheduled patient visits, worry spread quickly among his colleagues and the people who relied on him for treatment. Unlike many travelers, whose absence might take weeks to be noticed, Dr. York's failure to appear was immediately recognized as highly unusual. Search groups were formed within hours, and inquiries were made at inns, posts, and small settlements along his route. The Benders admitted that Dr. York had stayed with them, but insisted he left early the next morning, eager to make up for lost time. They said he refused their offer of breakfast, preferring to eat on the trail. Kate, in particular, appeared deeply worried about him and even offered to perform a séance to discover his fate, claiming her psychic powers could reveal what had happened. During the séance, which was attended by several community members helping in the search, Kate declared that she was receiving messages from beyond. In a strange, altered voice, she spoke of visions of the doctor being attacked by Indians or robbed by bandits near the Colorado border. Her act was so powerful and moving that some listeners were brought to tears, and it managed to shift suspicion away from the Bender family, turning the search in other directions. But Dr. York's brother, Colonel Alexander York, was not satisfied with spiritual answers or vague stories. A veteran of the Civil War, he had gained sharp investigative skills through his years of service. He came to Libet County with a group of men determined to trace his brother's exact steps. Their careful, detailed search soon uncovered problems with the Benders, story that raised troubling doubts. Colonel York's inquiry revealed that others had gone missing on the same road in past years. These cases had never been linked because they happened in different seasons and involved people of different backgrounds. A German immigrant named George Lonar vanished in 1871 while traveling with his savings, gold coins sewn into his clothing. In 1872, a cattle driver named Ben Brown disappeared after being last seen along the Osage Mission Trail. carrying a large payment for delivered cattle. A family named Mackenzie, father, mother, and young daughter, also vanished while traveling from Iowa to Kansas. Their wagon and belongings never recovered. In every case, the missing people had last been spotted at or near the Bender Inn, though no one had connected the dots because the disappearances were months or years apart, and the investigations were handled by separate local officials who rarely shared information. Once Colonel York gathered the evidence and showed it to local leaders, the disturbing pattern could no longer be ignored. Further digging into Kate Bender's past revealed a far deeper scheme than anyone had imagined. Her reputation as a spiritualist had not been simple chance. It had been carefully shaped as part of a wider criminal plan. The evidence suggested that the Bender family's activities were not limited to one roadside inn, but could be part of a network of crimes across several states. It became possible that Kate's charm and supposed powers had lured dozens of victims to their deaths all across the frontier. Records from nearby counties showed that a woman matching Kate's unusual physical appearance and using different versions of her name had been running similar spiritual consultation services in at least 3 separate towns across Kansas and Missouri during the previous 5 years. In every instance, she managed to establish herself in communities placed along main travel routes, building a reputation for her supposed psychic talents, while keeping ties with family members who operated inns and boarding houses that often served travelers carrying expensive goods or large amounts of cash. In Parsons, a woman calling herself Kate Gart had held séances and sold herbal cures from a small shop connected to a boarding house run by her relatives between 1868 and 1870. Newspaper archives from that time included many advertisements for her services, describing her as a gifted medium with extraordinary powers of spiritual connection and healing. These ads promised that she could deliver messages from lost loved ones, provide direction for important choices in life, and even offer cures for sicknesses that confused regular doctors. Several old residents remembered her as a charming, well-spoken woman who claimed to see visions about missing people in the area, often sharing details that seemed too accurate to ignore. During her time in Parsons, Kate Gart built a loyal group of clients who said she gave them comfort in grief and guidance in uncertain times. But her stay there also matched up with a troubling pattern of strange disappearances among travelers moving through the region. At least 4 men, each known to be carrying valuables or large sums of cash, vanished without explanation while traveling routes that passed near the boarding house where Kate lived and worked. She left town suddenly in the spring of 1870, claiming she had received a spiritual call to move west, abandoning customers who had already paid for upcoming consultations. In a similar way, in Chitopa, Kansas, a woman using the name Kate Miller ran a fortune, telling service out of a boarding house managed by her relatives between 1870 and 1871. Residents there recalled that she offered the same services as in Parsons but added new ones, including palm reading, card fortune telling, and more elaborate spiritual ceremonies that drew people from faraway towns. Her reputation for predicting the future with accuracy attracted wealthy clients willing to pay large fees for private meetings. Once again, her time there coincided with unexplained disappearances. One case involved a rich cattle buyer named James Patterson, who carried large amounts of money to purchase livestock. Patterson was last seen entering the boarding house to consult with Kate Miller on the evening before his scheduled departure. He was never seen leaving. When his worried business partners checked the next day, they were told Patterson had received a sudden spiritual message that urged him to travel at once to Colorado, where he would supposedly find excellent business opportunities. That same night, Kate Miller vanished too, leaving only a note claiming that a divine vision had ordered her to set up a new mission in western Kansas. These findings created a disturbing picture of Kate Bender as possibly the most dangerous member of what looked like a traveling criminal family that had been active on the frontier for years. Rather than building one permanent base, they appeared to move in an organized way from place to place, opening short-term businesses that allowed them to spot wealthy victims, rob them, and vanish before suspicion became too strong or local officials started asking serious questions. Kate's role as a spiritualist gave her the perfect cover to collect detailed information about potential victims while also earning the trust of the community. Her supposed psychic skills gave her a believable reason to ask personal questions about her clients' finances, families, and travel plans. The private setting of a spiritual consultation made people more likely to share details they would normally keep secret. Details that Kate could use to decide whether someone was a good target. More disturbing was the evidence that her séances and psychic acts were carefully staged psychological tricks meant to single out victims and at the same time boost her image as a real medium. Former clients who survived described a repeating pattern in her readings. She would pretend to receive messages from dead relatives that asked for specific details about the living person's life, plans, and money. Investigators also learned that Kate had studied the methods of traveling mentalists and spiritualists, learning cold reading tricks, séance illusions, and psychological suggestion techniques. These skills helped her convince people she truly spoke with spirits. She owned a large collection of books on spiritualism, mind reading, and herbal medicine, which she had studied carefully to improve her deception. Instead of having true supernatural powers, she had worked for years to master the tools needed to fool others. Most chilling of all was the discovery that Kate kept secret records of her clients and their sessions. These documents, hidden in a concealed compartment in her bedroom wall, contained detailed information about dozens of people, notes about their money, family, travel habits, and weaknesses that could be used to plan their deaths. Many of the names matched those of missing persons from across Kansas and Missouri in the past decade, suggesting that the Bender family's crimes stretched far wider and had lasted longer than anyone had guessed. The records also included descriptions of killing methods, body disposal techniques, and strategies for avoiding discovery, showing a level of planning rarely seen in frontier crime. As this picture became clearer, Conemo York realized they were dealing with far more than a simple robbery that had turned violent. The Bender family seemed to be part of a skilled and organized network that had preyed on travelers for years. With Kate as the one who found and lured the victims, suspicion in Labette County grew intense. Tensions reached a high point when Colonel York announced that he intended to search the Bender property thoroughly. Armed with legal authority from the territorial government and supported by a growing number of townspeople who were now convinced of the family's guilt. At first, local officials were hesitant to interfere with what seemed like a decent family business. But as more proof surfaced connecting the Benders to the disappearances, pressure mounted and public opinion turned sharply against them. Katie's reaction to the planned search was the first real crack in her carefully built mask of innocence and spiritual purity. Instead of welcoming the chance to prove her family's honesty, she became nervous and upset, making wild and inconsistent claims about spiritual forces and unseen threats. She told neighbors that angry spirits had warned her of dreadful punishments if the search went ahead, and she insisted that disturbing the energies on their land would bring curses on the investigators and their families. During this tense period, several residents of the area finally came forward with stories they had earlier ignored or kept quiet about because of their friendships with the Benders. Martha Stevens, who lived on a nearby farm about 2 miles from the Bender property, recalled seeing the Bender men digging in their orchard at strange hours, often working with lanterns late at night, when most farmers would have been asleep. She had originally believed they were planting more fruit trees or tending their garden, but the odd timing and secrecy of their digging now seemed troubling, especially since it looked more like they were making holes than planting crops. Samuel Rogers, a traveling salesman who had stayed at the Bender Inn several times over the last 2 years, spoke about Kate's increasingly unusual behavior during his visits and her constant interest in his trade and money matters. She had asked him detailed questions about his work, the trade paths he used, and the expensive goods he carried, often pressing him to reveal which items were most profitable and where he got his supplies. On his last visit, he woke up in the middle of the night to find her standing over his belongings in the sleeping area. She quickly explained that she was only checking to make sure no other travelers tried to steal from him. Even more troubling was the account of Thomas McBride, a farmer in the area who sometimes hired John Bender Jr. for heavy work on his land and had been disturbed by some of the things the younger man said while they worked together. McBride reported that John Jr. would suddenly brimble up death and violence, giving unsettling descriptions of how a person might kill another without leaving clear evidence or being caught by the law. His remarks included knowledge of the human body and methods of causing fatal wounds that seemed far too advanced for someone with his simple mind and background. At the time, McBride thought these strange statements were just the result of John Jr.'s limited understanding and his exposure to butchering animals or hunting. But now, in light of the investigation into missing people, his words seemed far darker. John Jr. had also spoken about people who had gone to join the spirits, and often showed an odd sort of pleasure when talking about death as if it was just a step into another world. As the investigation grew more intense, Kate tried several desperate ways to protect her family by using her supposed spiritual powers. She arranged elaborate séances meant to show her family's innocence and to turn suspicion toward others. These displays became much more dramatic and emotional than her earlier spiritual shows, suggesting she knew her usual tricks were no longer working and that she was growing more frantic to hold on to her credibility. In one especially dramatic session, held in front of several respected members of the community, Kate claimed she was channeling the spirit of Dr. York himself. She spoke in a noticeably different voice and gave detailed claims about his fate, saying that he had fallen victim to bandits far from the Bender farm. But her story contained mistakes that made people doubtful. She gave wrong details about his medical work, mentioned family members who never existed, and described sides of his personality that clashed with what people who truly knew him had experienced. The case shifted in a major way when Colonel York got official approval to carry out a complete search of the Bender home and land. He was supported by volunteers from nearby towns and law officers who had come from Topeka to help. The search was set for May 5, 1873, and news of it spread quickly, bringing curious onlookers from miles around, eager to see the outcome of what had become the most infamous criminal mystery in Kansas territory. For Kate Bender, this was the final test of whether her years of lies and tricks could hold up under the careful eyes of trained investigators, who would not fall for her usual games of distraction and emotional manipulation. The planned search meant that every room would be checked. Suspicious spots on the land would be dug up, and each family member would be questioned in a way where stalling or spiritual theatrics would no longer work. But on the morning of May 4, just hours before the search was due to begin, something happened that completely changed the course of the story and turned it from a simple criminal case into one of the largest manhunts in American frontier history. A neighbor riding past the Bender property at dawn noticed no smoke coming from the chimney and no signs of activity around the usually busy inn. This seemed strange because the family normally began their chores before daylight. When he got closer to check, he found the house empty, with clear signs that the family had left in a hurry during the night. They had taken only the bare necessities and left behind valuables, making it seem more like they had fled in panic rather than moved away by plan. The realization that the Benders had vanished as completely as many of their missing guests was shocking. It meant their crimes were worse than suspected, and also that many questions about what they had done would never be fully answered. The deserted inn gave investigators a sight that would stay with them forever, showing evidence of repeated violence that was beyond what even experienced frontier law officers were prepared for. As Colonel York and his men searched the property carefully, Each new finding added another terrible layer to the truth of what had been happening inside what once looked like a simple frontier home. The first breakthrough came when investigators noticed dark, uneven stains on the wooden floor near the canvas curtain that separated the inn's main room. These stains hadn't come partly hidden with rugs and furniture, but matched the appearance of heavy amounts of blood that had seeped between the boards and soaked into the beams below. The stains were right under where guests would have sat at the dining table, pointing to the fact that multiple violent acts had likely happened in the same place over time. When the boards were pried up with crowbars and tools, the searchers found a hidden trapdoor leading to a root cellar completely concealed from normal view. The trapdoor design was advanced for a frontier building, with hinges that allowed it to open quietly and a lock system that worked from above to keep anyone inside from escaping. The skilled workmanship suggested it had been built for killing and disposing of victims rather than storing food. The cellar beneath the home showed evidence of horrifying violence beyond what anyone feared. The dirt floor was soaked with what was clearly human blood, forming a thick, full-smelling mud that must have built up over years of use. The walls showed dark splashes and marks suggesting many deaths had taken place there, while the low ceiling bore dents and gashes where victims had been attacked with heavy weapons. All around the cellar were tools and weapons that had clearly been used in killings. Several hammers of different sizes still carried blood, hair, and bits of tissue despite being wiped down. Kitchen knives also showed signs of bloody use, while a large wooden mallet appeared to have been the main weapon in many murders, its surface deeply stained and marked from repeatedly striking bone and flesh.